Iowa State and Kansas, late November, not basketball. We're going football today on a Locked On Cyclones, Locked On Jayhawks crossover.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into a Locked On Cyclones, Locked On Jayhawks crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now the number one sports podcast network. I'm Nick Marvitz alongside Derek Johnson. We're going to break down the football game between Iowa State and Kansas this weekend. We're going to go ahead and start with just big storylines, overarching, how's the season gone? How could it look in just a few weeks? Then we're going to dive into some key players, key takeaways, not takeaways necessarily, key guys and how they could impact the game. And then final predictions, general final wrap it up notes type of deal. But before we get that far, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. All right, Derek, let's go ahead and dive into this because this is not at the top of very many people's watch lists, I would assume, unless you're an Iowa State or a K-State fan. But what has Kansas gone through this season that this game has kind of become the pinnacle to move into the bowl eligibility category? 6 wins on the line. What's Kansas been through so far?
They've been through hell, basically, to get here. No, I mean, it has not been the most fun situation to get to this point. I mean, KU started the season hot. They were looking pretty good. You had a loss to Missouri, but you had some blowout wins in there. You were 3-1, and even the loss at Missouri, you were leading late. And then from there, things have just kind of fallen apart a little bit for different reasons. Some games it's been the defense. Some games it's been an inability to close. Some games it's been, maybe not scoring in the second half. Some games it's been a little bit of everything, like the Kansas State game. And now you're in a situation where you're trying to avoid missing a bowl game for a second straight season. And Kansas is over 30 seniors on the roster. They could really use those extra practices for bowl season to get the young guys just extra reps headed into, the offseason, into spring ball, into next year. So this is a huge game for them because this one seems, if you're just basing it off like what Vegas is going to project the point spread as, they're 3.5-point underdogs. That's going to be a smaller line than they're going to have in the Utah game for senior day, where I'd imagine that'll be a double-digit line.
Yeah, Utah, obviously, I have had my comments about Utah this season, but Utah, a very tough team, and Kansas will have to, I think, get it done this weekend. I will admit, I watched Kansas early on this year, namely against Fresno State and then Mizzou. I thought you guys looked good. I genuinely was a little frightened of Kansas and what Jalon Daniels, what your guys' ceiling was, essentially. Didn't quite cap out around there. Where would you put them kind of in your preseason ceiling floor situation? Did they kind of live up to expectations? Because the way I see the schedule, I said it this week, perfectly mid. You beat the teams you're supposed to beat, and you've lost to the teams that probably weren't supposed to beat. So where do you rank this season so far, and how terrified should Iowa State be that they come out screaming out the gates?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. Like, they've just been kind of an average football team, right? I think it's something where before the season started, they were 7.5 on the Vegas over-under win total. So I think the hope was, could they at least get to 7 wins? I think the baseline, though, it's can you get to bowl eligibility? I think the real hope here was, could you get to a bowl game and beat one of your rivals? You didn't beat one of your rivals, so that's already gone and passed. You still have a chance to get to a bowl game here if you can beat Iowa State. And so it's a little bit of opportunity for redemption. It did feel like, last year they had such bad luck almost. I don't know, bad luck, maybe not the right word, because they kind of made their bad luck in a lot of ways in what they did or didn't do. But last year they were 1-5 in 1-score games. And sometimes that number can like flip year to year. Some teams are just good at it. Some teams are bad at it based on certain factors. But for a lot of teams, that can be a number that's fickle year to year. And the hope was, hey, maybe some of those can start going your way. Well, turns out this year, not really the case. You lose a 1-score game to Arizona. You lose a 1-score game to UCF. You lose the Missouri game's not a 1-score game, but you were up with like 6 minutes to go in that game. So it's kind of like a 1-score game. You haven't had that reverse of fortune. And so now you come into this game and what's just by Vegas expected to be a close game. That is certainly scary for KU fans. I think it's interesting because I almost think like the way of looking at this is, could both fan bases be scared? Kansas fan base is scared because if it's a close game, like that probably doesn't add up well. Iowa
Right.
State, is there a level of nerve coming into this game knowing they've lost 3 straight to Kansas? I don't know.
I would assume on some level there is in the back of their minds to kind of go off of you're flipping the token from last season, right? Iowa State has kind of been in the same boat, but it really comes down to the injury situation. So that'll probably come up more in the key players in our second segment. But for now, I'm amazed that Iowa State has made it to 6 wins already. The big win was against TCU, I feel like. Early on in the season, we were 5-0, like everything was going, and then you lose a ridiculous number of guys in the secondary especially, but across the team, obviously now with Gabe Burkle out at the tight end position. I don't know how they're able to band together every week, but against this Kansas team, they're really going to have to, like, the list is ridiculous as far as the injury report goes. They've actually stopped putting guys on the list because it just would be too long for the graphic. If they're out for the season, they no longer appear on there. So how is Iowa State's season gone? Like just generally kind of amazing. Somehow they find themselves in a situation where they can go 8-4 in the regular season after losing 4 straight. Like nobody saw that coming. I'm curious. You've obviously, in some ways, I think, moved on to basketball, right? There is definitely an element of just as the fan base goes. I think that's totally fair. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of Iowa State fans felt that way prior to the TCU win. Do you think that there's anything like that going on? Not necessarily, obviously, football guys moving on to basketball. They're not like, I can't wait to go watch basketball games.
Right.
But done with the season, or is this like they can feel that you got to get to 6 wins?
There's always a section of KU football diehards and KU football fans that are going to be there. But I do think the average fan, the general fan, it has been a little bit of a moving to, KU basketball season.
Mm-hmm.
I think having the bye week last week, right when it was really starting to ramp up, and you get the Champions Classic this week, I do think there's back to kind of a big focus on basketball for a majority of KU fans. Now, I think you'll be able to see that a little bit in the Utah game. Like if you go look online, like if you go look on Game Time and go look at tickets for the game, last I checked, like you could get in for like $7, which is by far the cheapest ticket of any game this year. I do think part of that too, it's not just about the interest fading. It is about it's Black Friday at 11 a.m. So like that's going to be tough. But point being, I do think that is interesting. But I don't know, maybe in a way that's like good that they're on the road for this game. Because it is, I'd imagine, you tell me, is this going to be a pretty juiced environment, senior day, right?
Yeah, it is going to be senior day. I think it's going to be pretty juiced up for Iowa State. This has been a year this is like a loyalty test is kind of how I viewed it, just as far as like how last season went. You go to the conference championship and then you start the year 5-0. What are we what are we made of when we're 0-4 through our last 4, right? And it feels like the fan base has really bounced back and supported these guys and shown we've done this in the past, right? Like I think we had a 4-win season. I don't remember how many years ago it was, but the fan base will always be there. And Jamie Pollard mentioned that this is going to break attendance records for Iowa State this season. I don't know if it's this game or if it's the final game of this. No, it would be this game because it was last home game. Duh. So this game is going to be actually totally packed out. It's going to be a huge environment. And we've seen how teams have performed at Jack Trice under this environment, namely, obviously, the Iowa team didn't quite get it done there. But the early segment against BYU was another one that I looked towards because Bear Bachmeier, a true freshman, and it's going to be tough. Now, Jalon Daniels, obviously, veteran quarterback, right? Like he knows his way around the football field. So next, we need to talk about how important is Jalon Daniels going to be and a few other guys that I think are going to be extremely key in this coming up right here after this. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. College football is back, and I couldn't be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's just nothing like it. But let's be real. Actually getting tickets can feel like more of a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. The app made it super simple, and my favorite feature of all time is that I could even see my exact view from my seat before I bought it. Honestly, it's faster, it's cheaper, and it's less stressful than any other way that I've bought tickets. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Derek Johnson, Nick Morovitz here breaking down the Kansas versus Cyclone football game. We're still in football mode here, even though it is late November. We're going to go ahead and pivot towards key players, right? Keys that have to go a specific way, namely players, though, where we're going to start. For Iowa State, I just want to get this out of the way. It's got to be Dom Orange, okay? And there's no other way around it, especially on the defensive side. Now, on the offensive, we can go towards that in a minute, but just based on what Iowa State has remaining, it has to be Dom Orange stepping up big time. And I watched a few of Kansas's games, and I guess you can kind of answer this question for me here, but I feel like Kansas really, they love the screen game, do they not?
Last year more so than this year, but they definitely will use it, especially with Henderson and Pickett, who are a couple receivers that they like to get the ball in their hands.
Yeah, that was one thing that I feel like I don't see a lot of screen just across college. You'll see it from time to time, but I noticed it prominently against Kansas, so I circled it. And that's one thing that I think Dom Orange can do. I feel like he has a really good feel for when it's too easy. He's got to back off. So I expect him to step up big in that regard. But the other takeaway I had from Kansas watching a few of their games was they like to get east to west a lot of the time. But when they don't, they are not afraid to bring it straight up the middle with, Highshaw or whatever, just come a million miles an hour down the A gap. And I expect Dom to clog that hole, reset that defensive line of scrimmage. How big do you think Dom Orange will be as far as stopping Kansas? And then who do you have first up as your key player?
Yeah, I mean, shoot, I remember Dom Orange's recruiting situation. I think it was like Iowa State, Michigan, maybe Kansas was trying to get in on. He's a Kansas City kid. And so yes, he's been so good. I mean, you look at the raw stats, you might say, 18 tackles, like what? No, this dude is like a game changer. He's taking up blocks. He's opening up things for other people. So, yeah, I think it's a great matchup, too, because KU's strength of their offensive line is the interior. So I think that'll be a fun matchup. I'm going to actually reverse it and take a KU defensive tackle who's from Iowa, and that would be Blake Harold. Blake Harold is having a great season right now for KU. He's a redshirt sophomore. It seems like every week there's one or two plays every week where you go, wow, that was a great play by Blake Harold, whether it's a pressure or a TFL or a sack or something. He's been really good for KU. And I know the Iowa State, offensive line, like looking at the Pro Football Focus grades, looks like the left tackle is more of the weakness as opposed to like the center has really good grades. So I think that just becomes a really interesting matchup. And that is one of my worries against the Iowa State offense is are Hansen and Sama, is the running game of Iowa State going to be able to just, pound their way down the field? And that's kind of where a player like Blake Harold and the defensive tackle comes in.
If you're asking me, they can. The offense or the running backs can do that to Kansas. Whether Taylor Mauser thinks that's going to happen or not is a totally different question. And that's really, to pivot to the offense, I want to say Rocco Becht is the most key player. It's Taylor Mauser. If he can manipulate this offense the right way, Iowa State has a chance to win this game. But we've seen time and time again that he just doesn't. I don't know what it is. Something is not quite there. It might be a 3rd and 5 that he wants to run a sprint out. I said it yesterday. If I see one sprint out, I'm gonna lose my mind in this game. He loves to go to the sprint out in 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6 in the goal line situations. I don't know why he loves to do that. He might just prefer to maybe QB sneak with Gabe Burkle, who will be out for this game. But that's kind of his vibe. It's just random plays at times. It feels like we can't afford to do that. So my offensive guy is sadly Taylor Mauser because this team is good enough on offense. Rocco Becht has had a rough few weeks. He just needs to step it up. He's very capable. We've seen him do it before. The wide receivers need to stop dropping passes. Yeah, but I can't pick one guy out of a whole group. It's not just one. It's the whole thing. So really it comes down to offensive coordinator. For me, Jalon Daniels is the guy I'm probably the most scared of on Kansas. Is that fair, or is there maybe someone else I'm overlooking?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting with all the injuries for Iowa State. because every year Iowa State has one of the best defenses, one of the best passing defenses, not just like in the conference, but in the country. And obviously all these injuries have hindered that, right? But at the end of the day, like they're still, I'm looking at the numbers right now, like they're still 58th in the country. So they're still like, slightly above average in yards per attempt and 56th in the country in completion percentage again. So it's like, it's not a bad unit, but maybe there's even more injuries now that is taking it to another level. I don't know. But it's really interesting with Jalon because he has been hit or miss against these styles of defenses. It's either like he's thrown for over 400 against Cincinnati, who runs the same scheme, or he's under 100 yards like we saw against Iowa State in 2022, or he had like 120 yards against Kansas State, who runs kind of a similar defense. So I don't exactly know what to expect, to be completely honest. Like when Kansas went up to Ames and won in 2023, it was Jason Bean making some great throws and the receivers making some contested grabs. I don't know that they have the possession receivers they had now, or that they had then that they have now. They have more yard after catch receivers. So I'm going to be interested to see how that kind of comes together. I'm kind of looking at Daniel Highshaw, if I'm being completely honest, because I look at Iowa State and I say, okay, they are 97th in the country in yards allowed per carry right now, 86th in the country in negative play rate against the run. I think there's something to be had on the run. And I was looking at this earlier. This is a number I've mentioned throughout the week on podcasts here. Iowa State's given up 140 or more rushing yards 4 times this year. They are 1-3 in those 4 games. And the one win was that 8-point win against Arkansas State. So I think you could argue that when that's happening, it's not putting them in great spots to win the game. So I'm actually looking at Highshaw in this game.
That's actually a great stat. I did not know that. When you talk about blocking or stopping the run, my first thought immediately goes to Arizona State, just because that was so ugly. I saw that in person and I was like, I can't even hardly believe what I'm seeing. When you go to the secondary, I'm not exactly sure what we're going to get there. I know what Kansas is going to lay out, though. I know Kansas is generally in a zone a lot of the time. So I'm interested to see how Chase Sowell is going to read the defense, how Xavier Townsend is going to read the defense. And on Xavier Townsend, Taylor Mauser had some comments this week about Xavier Townsend. And basically what he said was, we're trying to get him the ball, but teams are not letting it happen. Like they're specifically shutting him down. Do you think he's a threat to Kansas, or do you kind of see it as like, well, we haven't really seen him do too much because he's been shut down, but because we haven't seen anything, he's not really a threat to me?
No, I do. And Kansas's secondary has had some it's a young secondary. So there have been some games where it's looked really bad for KU. There's been some other games where you've seen some of the talent be able to flash. So I think just in general, like it's not even necessarily like one guy. It's just like, to me, it's more of like what is Kansas going to do this game? Because if it is one of those games where guys are just running wide open, it doesn't really matter which of the receivers it ends up being. And then you get back to, to tie this back together to that running game. Like if Iowa State's able to get their play action game going because they established the run, like that's going to help in that area too, where the KU linebackers and safeties aren't able to cover. I think of the Iowa State tight ends and how involved they are in the passing game. Then it becomes a problem there too. And I think this all, to me, like starts with one area, because interestingly enough, the Kansas running defense is actually 21st in the country in negative play rate. So they're getting a lot of tackles for loss. They're getting a lot of 0-yard runs against them, but they are just getting gashed with explosive runs, 123rd in the country defensively in explosive rush rate against them. And when I look at Iowa State, it's a good running game, but they're 81st in the country in explosive run rate. So what happens when those two things kind of meet together? How is that going to set up the passing game? I do think this is a good opportunity for Rocco Becht, like you said, to kind of have a bounce back game in a real way. But I just think, especially for both teams coming off of a bye week, I'm wondering like which team is going to have more wrinkles, and that can apply to offense, that can apply to defense. It is late in the season to maybe have like too much be different, too much be changed, but maybe that team who comes out with the trick play that works, maybe that team who comes out with the formation or the motion play that they didn't show on film before, like maybe that ends up being the difference.
It could definitely end up being a huge part of this game, but what ends up winning it for either Kansas or Iowa State, we're going to go ahead and cover that coming up right here after this. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to just ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. In this Iowa State-Kansas game, I hate to say it, but the Jalon Daniels over on passing yards does look relatively appetizing. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, I think we've laid out what we could see in this game for sure here at crossover between Locked On Cyclones and Locked On Jayhawks. Derek Johnson, what does Kansas need to do? Not what could happen, what needs to happen for Kansas to win this game? Non-negotiable.
It's always one of those like turnovers are helpful, right? I am going to go there, and here's why. Iowa State has 8 turnovers over their last 4 games. Kansas defense has forced 0 in their last 2. They've only forced 3 in their last 6. Where does that number end up being here? For Kansas to win this game, I think they have to win the turnover margin. They're an underdog here. You're playing on the road, tough environment to play against. I think they have to win the turnover margin. The other one I'm looking at is, can you establish the run a little bit here? Last year, Kansas put up 45 points on Iowa State, and they ran for, Devin Neal himself had like over 200 yards rushing. You don't have a Devin Neal anymore, but can you find a way to, I mentioned that 140 number earlier, can you at least get to like that point? Those are the two that I'm kind of really arcing and looking at here. And then I guess on the defensive end, like just don't get torched by a bunch of big plays.
That's valid. Actually, on the turnover battle, that it's not a terrible point because I've made that point before. Like this is a game that you absolutely cannot lose or tie the turnover battle. This is a game for Iowa State that I feel like they could probably tie. Now, losing the turnover battle, you don't want to do, but in the turnover department, I feel like Iowa State will be okay. I think they're the better team than Kansas. That's how I've approached this game with Kansas's schedule, big wins over bad teams, tough losses to good teams. I think not as good as like a Texas Tech, but I think Iowa State is better than Kansas. And I think if we just play our game, it's going to end up with the W. So that's going to be the result. The one thing that I really need to see Iowa State do, and it's non-negotiable for me, is lean on the run. Because we've seen Rocco kind of up and down this season. Great start ever since the hit against Cincinnati that everybody knows. That's where things started to go downhill a little bit. And so, or not necessarily downhill, but up and down. I don't want to see we start hot and then we're cold and we're trying to keep it working. We got to stick to the run game throughout the course of this one. And it's not even really develop the run for me. It's like that's got to kind of be the source of offense for Iowa State in this one. Defensively, I think it really just comes down to trying to limit the bleeding. Like if we can hold Kansas to a few field goals, that's a win. Played very well against TCU. So with Iowa State's defense situation, honestly, I'm just kind of happy with what they give us. Is there anything you'd like to see that isn't necessarily non-negotiable? Like I think Iowa State has to lean on the run, but I would like to see a few deep shots over top. I think Kansas is vulnerable in the cover 2 through the seam, as at least what I've seen this season, but it's not non-negotiable. What do you got on Kansas' side?
I would like to see a little bit of a pass rush there. I mentioned earlier that left tackle for Iowa State is like 41 pass block grade on Pro Football Focus. I'd like to see KU, whether it's Leroy Harris, Dean Miller, or something, kind of get after him. I'd also like to see the defense they kind of switch between a 4 down front and a 3 down front. And then they also have this like basically 5 down front, which is basically 3 defensive tackles with 2 defensive ends kind of playing as outside linebackers. And they're doing it too much where the defensive ends are dropping in coverage. I don't want to see that is what I want to see. So.
Interesting. I say I want Iowa State to rush more, bring 5, bring 6. They've done it in the past. This game, I said this to you before we went live. I don't want that. I want them to drop 8 as much as possible, really give the secondary the best chance. And one of the reasons that I said that, like, I think you have to drop 8, and I think you probably have to have a guy with his eyes on Jalon Daniels every single play. Like, I would be okay if we had one spy no matter what, just because of what he's capable of. But the other reason is it forces Kansas to beat you multiple times. You don't have to beat just an 8-man front. Everyone's blitzing. There was one hole. We've got Jeff Sims going for 88 yards. All he had to do was break one tackle. I think you drop all those guys, and this is basic football knowledge, but you force Kansas to beat you multiple times. Therefore, you limit large plays, which has been, I think, a big portion of Iowa State's problems this season is when you give up those big plays, it's a huge kind of change of momentum for the game. As far as, obviously, I'm sure you're going to take Kansas. I'm going to go ahead and take Iowa State. Unless maybe you're not. 3.5 is not a huge spread, so I wouldn't be too shocked if you went Iowa State. But actual score prediction, what do you have here?
Yeah, and real quick, just to add to your last point there, Jalon Daniels this year, when he's blitzed, 8.4 yards per attempt, 12 touchdowns to 1 interception. When he's not blitzed, 7.9 yards per attempt, 9 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. So it's not like that different, but he has actually been worse when he's not being blitzed. So to your point there, I actually am going to take Iowa State in this game. I've seen enough of Kansas losing close games. And, I just think, I don't know, Iowa State's lost 3 straight in the series. I feel like they're kind of due here, playing at home on senior day. I'm going to take the Cyclones 27-20.
That was glorious. I mean, I did not see that coming. I've never done a show with a Locked On host. It's like, yep, give me the other team. So I commend you for that one. I'm going to go ahead and, I don't know, I kind of like Iowa State to get some points here. We haven't really seen it this season. They've struggled. Sometimes it's a matter of actually getting in the end zone. We obviously went through the Kyle Conradi situation, so field goals were hard to come by. But Iowa State has struggled. I think that they break that mold here. I think they score, somewhere around 35 points, which would put Kansas roughly in the ballpark of 17-20. So I'm okay with a 35-17 victory for Iowa State. I think they get out ahead early and force Kansas to throw more than they probably would like to. Like you kind of alluded to the run game being a potential threat to Iowa State. I like Iowa State in this game, but I could see this one going either way. That's what's so special about this Kansas game is I don't know what it is. And I don't know what it is about Kansas. You kind of have said a few things that I don't necessarily agree with. Kansas, it feels like, is in every game ever. We saw what they did last year in the Big 12. So don't give up now. Don't give up too early on this Kansas team. It's not over until it's over.
I've just seen so many of these 1-score losses. I think it's 3-9 in their last 12 1-score games at this point in time. It's it beats you down, man. It's no fun. But they have had at least some recent success against Iowa State for whatever reason, and it's interesting because each and every one of those 3 wins is very different. The first one was more defense and Iowa State missing all those field goals. The second one was kind of a balanced game. It was 28-21, and the third one was offense. It was 45-36. So at the very least, I'm hoping this is a good game. And I do think if you're looking at this from a backs against the wall perspective, like you could make the argument Kansas is the more desperate team. Iowa State's already bowl eligible. Kansas is not. So maybe that can be something that Lance Leipold can use and they can pull the upset here.
Yeah, definitely. And you brought this up before we went live. I think this is just a valid point to kind of round out today's show. Both teams coming off the bye. From my perspective, Iowa State's been really good coming off the bye, dominated Arizona. I thought they had that BYU game. They were essentially like a player or two away from winning that. Kansas, not quite the same camp there. What do you make of that? I personally think that lands its hand to Iowa State, but am I missing something?
Yeah, so they crushed West Virginia off the bye, but West Virginia just, especially at that point with the quarterback situation, not very good. They got destroyed by K-State off the bye. What I'm almost more interested in isn't KU off the bye, it's their opponent off the bye, because KU's played 2 teams coming off a bye this year. Cincinnati, who put up 37 on them, had like 600 yards of offense and beat them, and K-State, who blew them out. So I do think there's an inherent advantage. KU does some funky stuff with formations, with motions, with how they, call different plays offensively and defensively. I think the extra week of prep against Kansas ends up being really, really impactful.
I actually agree with you completely. Watching the film, I was getting dizzy just watching. I don't know how you do it every single week. So thank you so much, Derek, for putting in the time with Kansas and putting in the time today to help me break down this game and this Locked On Cyclones, Locked On Jayhawks crossover. Where can everybody find your work if they're more interested in Kansas, especially going into basketball season?
That's right. If you want some Darren Peterson stuff, at LO_Jayhawks over on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. And then Locked On Jayhawks anywhere you get your podcast and on YouTube.
Awesome. I cannot wait. This is going to be a fun one. It doesn't necessarily seem like it will. Before the season, maybe a little bigger than now, but don't ever count out Kansas versus Iowa State. Be sure to hit subscribe down below, ladies and gentlemen. It is and always will be Kansas versus Iowa State.